Hello. Hello. Hey, everybody. How are you? Thank you for coming. You found us here. This is a new venue for us, and we were scared no one would know where we were. Because none of us know where this building is.
What time is the accounting lecture?
Yes, this is Accounting 101, right? You're in the right place, right? I hope so. Okay, well, thank you for coming tonight to the first of our Visiting Writers Series events for the fall. We have Matt Bell, who's going to be reading. You've noticed that Matt Bell's books are for sale outside the room. If you don't have any now, go get them, because I think you're going to want them by the end. He'll sign books at the end, and so make sure you pick up a copy. I also want to mention that there are a couple of other events coming in the Visiting Writers Series this fall. On Halloween, we have poet Alan Michael Parker coming to read, and I think maybe it's the same exact room. So now that you found it once, you can either just stay on and make a lifestyle out of it, or you can come back on Halloween. And Alan has promised me that he will come in costume. So, not to be missed, And then in November, on November 13, not that big of a date, who cares? It's not a special holiday or anything. But we do have nonfiction writer Poe Ballantine. He says he will not come in a costume. So, make your choices accordingly. But we have those two events coming up. They're going to be terrific. The other thing that I want to mention is, cell phones, you should turn them off. You should, pretend you're on an airplane or something. Unless, and we have two ideas, unless you want to kind of live blog the event, and we'll screen that on this screen here. Or you can edit Matt's Wikipedia page, and he's totally fine with that, and that'll be up on this screen. So otherwise, your phone should be gone for the event. So, okay, now I'm going to bring up PhD fiction student Zach Van de Zande to give us the introduction. So, here we go.
That is some misplaced applause. I'm not mic'd, so hopefully you can hear me. There's just one, and I figured he should have it. If I look stupid, it's fine. So I'm going to do the introduction, then I'm going to bring on Matt Bell, and then you can start caring. Matt Bell is the author of the novella Cataclysm Baby and the short story collection How They Were Found. He is also an important steward of literature through his work with Zank Books and The Collagist. His first novel, In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, was released this summer. It is a dark, post-Freudian fairy tale of grief and love, of the dangers that lurk both inside and outside of the family, of a man's struggle to learn that meaning to do something is not the same as doing it. Its simple prepositional title, like much of what Matt Bell does, belies the depths of meaning that exist within. Like all great fiction, Matt Bell's work asks its reader some difficult questions. Can some organizing principle, an index, an alphabet, a catalog of rooms make sense of that which is senseless? Which is more to be feared, the monster lurking at the bottom of the lake, or the man who knows how to be a husband but not a father? Or are they the same thing? If a wolf is not a moral creature, then why would the story of one require the morality we put on it? What are we without our memory? These questions and others often hint at one vital answer, that to be lost is not the obverse of understanding, that is in fact a requirement to understanding, as is exemplified in these lines from The Cartographer's Girl, the opening story of How They Were Found. My Kindle's being stupid, and I'm a dumb millennial who can't print things. He spreads his map before him, messy with 1,000 corrections, and then, eraser in hand, he tries again. One by one, he eliminates all his symbols, destroys them, and replaces them with words. Mere words, great words, words that denote, and words that describe, and words that will direct him in the way he needs to go. Ground truth disappears, is replaced by something else, by truth as meaning, as yellow brick road, as key to a lock, to a door, to an entrance. His work leads us to that entrance, and we're lucky to have him, either here in front of us, or pressed onto our pages, or out there in the woods, crafting, questioning, bringing back some new truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Bell.
Let me turn this mic on. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Oh, there it is. Thank you very much for that incredibly kind introduction. I always feel like the introduction is the most nerve-wracking part of the reading because I find out what I have to live up to. That's a lot, so I'll try. So we're going to read a couple different things tonight. I'm going to read a very short story from my first collection, How They Were Found, and then I'm going to read probably 3 chapters from In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, which are also fairly short. Before we start with my stuff, I really like to start readings with something of somebody else's. Like I like to maybe share something else that I like first. I'm a collector in some ways of poems or stories that feel like metaphors for writing or that somehow talk to me about the responsibilities of a writer. And one of those poems is a poem called Hunger by Jack Gilbert, who's a favorite poet of mine who passed away last year. So I'm just going to share this short poem by Jack Gilbert, and then we'll dive into to my stuff. Hunger. Digging into the apple with my thumbs, scraping out the clogged nails and digging deeper, refusing the moon color, refusing the smell and memories, digging in with the sweet juice, running along my hands unpleasantly, refusing the sweetness, turning my hands to gouge out chunks, feeling the juice sticky on my wrists, the skin itching, getting to the wooden part, getting to the seeds, going on, not taking anyone's word for it, getting beyond the seeds. I always really like that, and I like that last idea, that something we do as writers is to not take other people's words for it, right? Like, this is an apple, but like, how do you see the apple, right? Like, how do you see this thing? To go past its center, to go deeper into it. I like that idea. Writer's responsibility, the way to make great writing is to not take anyone's word for what the world is. So another way of thinking of the task. The story I'm going to read is a story called Her Aeneid. It's in 9 sections. It's the protagonist is a woman who's just found out she's pregnant, and each of the sections is a idea of what her child might turn out to be, a sort of fantastical version of that. And will hopefully offset in some ways the very male narrator and father in the novel. This is Her Aeneid. Her baby is a joke, just a tiny bundle of cells dividing, too small to be taken seriously. For another week or 2, it will still be smaller than the benign tumor she had removed from her breast 2 years ago, a realization that leads her touching the place where that lump once was whenever she's alone. She jokes about this to her friends who don't find it funny. She doesn't either, but she can't stop herself from sharing about her tumor-sized baby, growing and growing, taking over her body. This time, no one wants her to stop it or get rid of it. This time, people say congratulations and hug her instead of pretending she's contagious, instead of forgetting her number until they hear she's better. Like before, she's only angry because everyone always assumes they already know exactly how she feels about the events that happened to her. She is careful to keep her true feelings to herself, to see that, as with the tumor, there is much she could lose. Her baby is a seed, barely planted, but already pushing roots through its waxy coat, searching for the dank soil it needs to grow inside her. She pictures it flowering, but knows it'll be years before her baby is old enough for flowers, for seeds of its own. Her doctor emphasizes nutrition, suggests she drinks 6 to 8 glasses of water every day. She doesn't respond, doesn't tell him how many more she's already drinking. At home, she holds her face under the faucet, her throat pried open to swallow all the water she can. When she stands, her face and neck and shirt are soaked through, but it is not enough. She puts her lips back to the flowing water and drinks as deep as she can, as deep as she knows she must. Her baby is a stone, and she wonders, how can I love a stone? It is cool and dark, something formed not in an instant, as she always assumed her baby would be, but instead over an age, an epoch. Everything feels slower than she'd imagined it would. She pictures her stone skipping across the hidden darkness of a lake, each point of contact, a ripple expanding and then disappearing. She pictures skipping stones herself while she waits for the baby to come, transforming each ditch and puddle and pond and lake into a microcosm, into a point of departure, a possible place where one day she will have to go. Her baby is a thunderstorm, a bundle of negatively and positively charged ions about to interact violently. It is a hurricane or a monsoon or a tsunami, but she doesn't know which, doesn't know how to tell the difference. She feels it churning inside, growing stronger with each revolution. What happens after the baby comes will be different than what happens before. Whole countries she once knew will be swept away, their inhabitants scattered and replaced by new citizens, by other mothers and other children she has not yet met, but in whose company she knows she will spend the rest of her life. Her baby is a bird, mottled with gray and brown feathers that will last only as long as its infancy, when it will molt into splendor. Its mouth is open wide, waiting expectantly. Sometimes when she lies still in her quiet apartment, she can hear cawing from her round belly. She has cravings, contemplates eating quarters, little bits of tinfoil, even a pair of silver earrings. She hopes her baby is building a beautiful nest inside of her. She wants to give it everything it needs so that it might never leave. Nest as lie, nest as false hope. Her baby is a bird of prey, something she has never been this close to before. All those talons, all that beak, it hooks her, devours her. They're both so hungry, she eats and eats. Before this, she never knew birds had tongues. Her baby is a knife, a dagger, a broadsword, sharp and terrible. Her baby is a dangerous thing, and she knows that if she isn't careful, then one day it will hurt her, hurt others. When it kicks, she feels its edges pressed against the walls of its sheath, drawing more blood in a sea of blood. She is careful when she walks not to bump into things, not to put herself in harm's way. She wonders how it will hurt to push it from her body, to have the doctor tug her baby out of her as from a stone. Her baby is a furred thing, alternately bristled and then soft. She hopes it isn't shedding, wonders how she'll ever get all that hair out of her if it is. She searches online for images of badgers and then wolverines, looking for something to recognize in their faces. She types the words, creatures that burrow, then adds a question mark and tries again. The baby is so warm inside her, curled in on itself, waiting for winter to end, for a day to come when all the breath it's been holding can finally be expelled, like heat fogging the air of a still cold morning. Sometimes, when the baby rolls over and makes itself known, she can almost smell it. Now the water breaking, now the dilation of the cervix, now the first real contraction, more potent than any of the false warnings she experienced before. Now the worry that this is too early, that she hasn't learned yet what her baby is supposed to be. Now the lack of thought and the loss of discernible time. Now the pain, which is sharp and dull and fast and slow, which is both waves and particles at the same time. Now the hurry, the burst into motion after the near year of waiting. Now the push, the pushing, the rushing stretch of her suddenly elastic body, expanding to do this thing, to give birth to this baby. Now the joke, the seed, the stone, the storm, the bird, the sword. Now the tiny mammal, warm-blooded and hot, and yes, now the head covered in wet hair. Now the shoulders, now the torso and the arms, now the hip bones and the thighs and the knees and the feet. Now the first breath, now the eyes opening, now the cry calling out to her like deja vu, like the recognition of someone from a dream. Now the baby, now the baby, now the baby. An event repeating for the rest of her life. Her baby is a boy. Her baby is a girl. Her baby is potential energy changing to kinetic, is a person gaining momentum. Her baby is a possibility, or rather a string of possibilities and potentialities stretching forward from her towards something still unknowable. With the baby in her arm, she smiles, she coos, she tells her baby it can be whatever it wants to be. She tells her baby that no matter what it turns out to be, she will always recognize it when it comes back to her. There is no shape that could hide her baby from her, no form that would make her turn her back on it. She says this like a promise, swears it like she can make it true, like it's just that easy. Some days, no matter what she says, her baby cries and cries and cries. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I haven't read that story in a while. It's nice to get to again. I'm going to read 3 chapters from the novel, sort of spread out through it. Just to give you a little background, it's called "In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods." It's a myth about fatherhood and marriage. Takes place obviously in this title location, right? Newly married couple comes to live on the dirt between the lake and the woods to build a house there, to have a family that the husband is obsessed with having. Husband is a hunter and a fisherman. Initially a fisherman, later becomes a hunter. The wife is a beautiful singer who's able to sing objects into being with her voice. She initially sings small household objects, eventually sings the second moon into the sky. There's a giant bear, there's a giant squid, there's a ghost child that lives inside the father, there's another child, the ghost child is called the fingerling, there's another child called the foundling, the husband or the wife brings home from the woods, and from there it starts to get weirder. So it's that kind of book. So I'm going to read 3 parts, like I said, sort of spread through the early part of the book. This first part is going to be a little bit about their wedding and their coming to the dirt, and the husband's first encounter with this bear that becomes his adversary for much of the book. On the day of our wedding, on some now distant beach, my wife had sworn herself to me with ease and in faith, and I did likewise for her. Together we made the longest promises, vowed them tight, and it was so easy to do this then, to speak the provided words. We did not know what other harder choices would necessarily follow, as we made our first life together in a new city, and then again after we left that country and journeyed to the dirt. This plot stationed so far from the other side of the lake, from the mountains beyond that lake, on whose distant slopes we had once dwelled in the land of our parents, where perhaps there still perches that platform where we stood to speak our vows. How terrible we must have seemed that day, when together we were made to believe our marriage would then and always be celebrated by ceremony and by feasting, by the right applause of 100 kith and kin. And then later, how we were terrible again, upon this far lonelier shore, where when we came alone. When we first arrived upon the dirt between the lake and the woods, then there was still sun and moon, only one moon, and stars too, all the intricacies of their intersections circumscribing the sky, there passed a tale to last every night, a waking dream to fill the hours of every day. And despite that bounty, my wife was often flushed with tears, because what world we had found was not enough for her, not enough for me, not without the children we desired, that I desired, and that she desired for me. And despite her doubts, she said that she would try, if that was what I assured her I wished. In those days, there was no house, and until there was, required some place to sleep, to store the many objects we had been gifted at our wedding. And so we went into the woods to seek a cave, and in a cave we laid out our blankets and stacked our luggage, and there my wife waited amid that piled potential, while each day I went out onto the dirt, where I raised a house with just my shovel and axe, my hammer and saw, my hands hardened by the same. In that cave I did not leave her alone, though I had meant to do so. And all this happened long ago, when I still thought meaning to do something was the same as doing it, and I too was lonely as I built the house, and then the first rough shapes inside. I built the table and chairs, fashioned the stove and the sink, crafted the bed where I would lay my wife the first night I brought her across the threshold, where, as I watched, the ink of her hair wrote one future after another across the pillows and sheets, and in that splay of black on white, I smiled to see all the many possibilities of our family formed out of her body, drawn into my arms. But first, another memory, the first time I spied the bear watching me from within the woods. And when I saw it, I stilled my work upon the dirt, moved slowly to set down the tools with which I had not quite completed the house. At the tree line that marked the edge of the woods, the giant bear's back hackled, increased its size again, and the wedge of its head swayed huge and square from its massive shoulders, its mouth spilling yellow teeth and lolling tongue, exhalation steaming the morning chill. In the face of its stare, I stared back, and the bear slavered in response, shook its thick fur as welcome or warning, and when it saw it had my attention, it stood on its huge hind legs, its stamping body a dark tower opening to push a roar up toward the heavens, toward the sun that in those days still ran full circle. I froze, afraid the bear would charge, and in my fear I for a breath forgot my wife, and in the next breath I remembered, flushed with the shame of that forgetting. The bear growled and raked the ground and paced the tree line. From my remove, I noted the strangeness of its rankled movement, and also how it was not exactly whole. Where brown fur should have covered the expanse of its back, that fur was in places ripped, and the skin below was torn, so that an armor of bone poked through the wound, yellowed and slickly wet. Still the bear seemed hardly to know its hurt, its movements easy, unslowed, perhaps untinged with pain. It roared again, then abruptly it returned to the pathless woods, its bounding passage wide, but somehow also impossible to track, the bear tearing no new way, breaking no brambles, despite the bulk of its body. And then I too was running into and through the woods by my own path, across the avenues of pine straw, back to where I had left her, the cave where all our possessions were stored. I arrived to find our crates and cargo shattered upon the cave's floor, our clothes shredded, our clock broken, our wedding albums ripped from their bindings. With the passing of those photos went some memories of the old world across the lake, a place perhaps already doomed to fade soon after our arrival in this new one, but now lost, before I had erected the structures necessary to withstand that loss. And still some more terrible fear welled large within me, because despite my many cries, my wife did not make herself known, and so for some time I did not know if she was alive or dead. She's not dead. Don't worry. We were talking in the Q&A today about fairy tales and mythology and why those things are important to me, and what effects maybe to try to use in contemporary fiction or in longer fiction. And one of the things I mentioned really briefly, I think, was that what I really love is a certain kind of flatness of character that's in fairy tales. What Kate Bernheimer calls fairy tale characters silhouettes, right? It's just a silhouette of a person. Philip Pullman makes this analogy where he calls them the cardboard, like the flat cardboard, like puppets, where they're only painted on one side, and the audience is only given one side, right? But it's the only side we need. What I think this flatness does, when done well, if the surface is compelling and the story is compelling, is that the reader then fills in the other side. The reader fills in the rest of the character, or the rest of the emotion or moral. So even though we're always taught to make these round characters, it's not the only option. There's also another way to do it. And because the reader craves roundness, they will fill in the rest. And so that's one of the things that attempting to do in this book, at obviously a longer length than the fairy tale usually allows. Read just a little bit further. The husband and wife try to start a family, and things go badly as they must in novels. They have a series of miscarriages. One of these children ends up inside the husband as a ghost child. He calls the fingerling. The wife sings the second moon into the sky as a response to grief. But then she gets pregnant one last time, and this section is during that pregnancy. We had never before eaten meat, only fish, but the woods in those years brimmed with life. And at my wife's request I began to trap that bounty, so I might bring home new sustenance for her table, so that she might make the furs into blankets meant to keep her warm, while she grew this best last chance of a child. But the smell of seared rabbit or boiled squirrel turned my stomach, and I could not be made to try it, preferring instead the catch from the gray waters of the lake. My wife had no such hesitation, and so she took apart whatever I found with fork and knife, with savage fingers tearing seared muscle into smaller bites fit for her greased lips. I faced into her new gluttony, its sight offending from across the table, and at the fingerling's suggestion, I asked her why she needed these new foods, this meat that came to displace fish and fruit and vegetable, until all her diet was red and bloodied as never it had been before. In my father's house, she said, we ate only fish, but I am no longer in my father's house, and the old ways no longer bind me. She slid her pooled plate toward me, said that in this small world there were pleasures and powers I had not yet imagined, and that through them we might find some strength to share. She said, together we will remake this dirt, the sky above it and the ground below, and all the animals and birds and fish that crawl and fly and swim upon and around it. And by our own new laws, we will be better married, made anew, a family, she said. What you have always wanted at last arrived. For one way or another, I have found the will to give it. I did not know then of what she spoke, was afraid of this new manner in its speech. It sounds so like my own worst thoughts, like those of the fingerling. And so I shook my head, asked her not to speak this way again, and after she withdrew her plate, I returned to the woods, where afterward I spent more and more of my time. In my absence, my wife filled our rooms with more new-sung objects, baby things for her baby, made this time from no template of mine, but rather out of her own imagining. Meanwhile, I turned my anger to task, as I worked to empty the woods of all the animals favored by the bear, who I came to believe was lord over that shaded domain. When I say belief, I do not mean I knew what I believed, not in the way I had believed before coming to the dirt, in steepled buildings made to organize such feelings. Things were odder here than they were elsewhere, and most stories were not written as clearly. On the other side of the lake, across the mountains, the truth had been inscribed in the stars and could not be changed. Here upon the dirt, my wife had wiped clean that sky-flung slate, and so I was not sure what to believe, or where to look to rediscover what once I had simply known. Throughout this pregnancy's middle months, the fingerling and I continued to trap the woods, to bring home what meat and furs we earned. Our nights stretched troubled, some feeling in the gut, appearing in my dreams as in the fingerlings, its shadow disrupting our sometimes blended nightscapes. From within those sleepless hours, I would emerge blearily from the house, returning to the woods to check my traps for ferret or fox, for the rabbits or wild hounds stuck in the steel jaws of my mechanisms. And because I did not know what else to do with those whose meat my wife refused, I took up the taxidermist craft, the tanner's, to skin, to scrape, to preserve the furs, to make my wife shut them with needle and thread, for when our first clothes had turned to rags, to reclaim them as memory, their bodies arranged with glue and wire, their skin stretched over wood forms meant to decorate the walls of our house, to displace the long, empty picture frames. Above the traps, where shafts of moonlight descended through the branches, often a space existed wherein some segment of the shifted sky could be seen, where the last stars remaining did not retain their original seats, but rather slid along new curves, their paths distorting as my wife's moon's weight tugged the sky. Each night the fingerling cataloged this movement, and together my eager watcher and I searched for other signs, like how the once white glow of my wife's moon was perhaps even then tinged some shade of pink, and the sky was not all we watched nor all we wondered about. More and more we pondered what my wife learned in the cave, that house of the bear, where we lived without knowing to whom the cave belonged. How long did she know about the bear before it awoke from its long sleep? How long did my wife know, and what did she find between the time of her first knowing and that awakening, the bear rising to chase her from its home? Whatever she found, was this the source of her stronger songs, of the voice that made her words more powerful than mine, even though it was I who had claimed this dirt to rule? Or was it something else, something she and I had done together? This was the question I worried at, that I gnawed at like a bone, a cast-off rib too stubborn to share its marrow. And when at last that bone broke, what truth escaped its fracture was by it remade. for even our bones had memories, and our memories bones. I'm going to read just one last chapter. Thank you so much for your very kind attention. Another thing we talked about today was the idea of using like systems in stories or structures to contain grief or to make sense of grief or other emotions. And something that shows up a lot in stories of mine. And in this novel, eventually the family is sort of fractured by an act of violence, and the wife and the foundling flee from the husband into this maze that the wife has sung into being under the house, that the husband calls the deep house. And the chapter I'm going to read is the beginning of his pursuit of her. And in each room, he finds one single component of their marriage or of their life they lived together on the dirt or before coming there. And so he's allowed to sort of confront his life piece by piece. Memory as first exploration of the deep house, of this progression of rooms, to follow the many staircases down to the many landings, the many hallways branching out from behind progressively heavier doors, to open the first rooms and find the deep house made now a palace of memory, a series of rooms in which what I had forgotten had been curated, collected together with what I had tried to forget, and also with other moments that had occurred only in dreams, or else not at all, not for me. To find in each room some unadorned spectacle, my wife or me or us together, with or without those children we had failed to have, plus the ones she had stolen, that she had passed off as our own. Or not passed off, but made true. It was in those passages that I saw how even if I had not accepted the foundling into my family, still my wife had accepted him into hers, put him at its center, a space I believed I had once occupied, and so our house was divided, and then divided again, because what house might stand against a child loved by only one parent, when the jealous other held that same child in suspicion and contempt? And how for me the fingerling remembered everything, how the fingerling saw even what I would have left undiscovered, what I did not want to share with him or any other child, how even then he rode most often in my belly, in my thigh, in my throat, so he might always be close to the skin, soaking in the new airs I moved my body through. And so he was there too, in each of those many rooms, where otherwise there would have been only me, always me lonely and me alone among the tiny domains of my wife, sung into being as she passed, echoed throughout the deepening dirt. In the first room, I found piled the cargo we lost to the bear. Here again were the broken vases and cracked crystal, the shattered punch bowls, the punched-out platters. Here were the shredded rags of my wife's dress, and beside them my boutonniere, meant to be preserved inside a translucent bubble, now freed from where it had been glassed. Here were the intricate mechanisms of a handmade clock, gifted and then broken, stopped as all their clocks were eventually stopped. All these objects, seemingly each its own, but merely parts of a whole, what in the cave we had lost. And in this room, her wedding ring discarded. She had improved everything I had given her, but not this, and so its simple band remained only what it had ever been. I held the ring in my hand, and then I took off my own ring, and I laid both upon the stones. Rings had been insufficient to fasten us together, and it would take more than rings to rebind what had been broken. And in this room, the sound of my wife's knuckle first sliding beneath the beaten silver of that ring, a sound never before heard or else forgotten amid all the other business of our wedding day. And in this room, the footprints she made on the beach where we were wed, where we had stood atop that platform, separated by the priest and then joined by the same. And all this upon that other sunnier shore, where it was not always summer, but where often it was summer enough. And in this room, where my footprints that evening were, not always at her side, only sometimes so. And how I wished it had been different, that I had not walked away at the beginning of our marriage, when I thought it would always be so easy to return. And in this room, the words I used nearly every summer after, to beg from her one more child, even after she was determined only to stop the trying. and also before she found she wanted her motherhood again, wanted it this time for herself, wanted it more than even I had ever wanted or realized. And in this room, the scent of my wife's perfume as she passed, a smell once lovely, now stale as glue, and how I missed its original, how I had missed it. And in this room, every graying hair she pulled from her head or her body in the failed years between the fingerling and the foundling. Every piece of skin she rubbed raw in the bath, when between miscarriages she could not scrub away the hormone stink of motherhood falsely begun, all that hair and skin stuck wet to the floor. And in this room, a white suit that no longer fit, a shirt that wouldn't button, a tie that drew its knot too quick around the neck, the relics of a body betrayed against itself and against my wife, who had not agreed to love what fat and hair had acquired, nor the blank spaces replacing what it had lost, those first few teeth, those other small kindnesses. And in this room, my wife's garden, if she had not abandoned its offerings to eat the meat of the woods, what she might have grown with the labors of her hands instead of the song of her voice, what this dirt would have yielded to us if only she had again given the sun leave to shine. And in this room, a silver bowl full of her tomatoes, one taste of which revealed the tang of their song stuff, their lack of right reality, despite skin, despite juice and seeds. And in this room, all the faces of the fish I had taken from the lake, piled into a single mash of eyes and gills, teeth and scales. How surprised I was to see them, how easy it was to forget how many lives it took just to keep myself alive, to feed my wife and the foundling. All these bodies knifed open so we might continue another day. And in this room, the buzzing of bees, and then elsewhere, another room full of bees. Two separate sounds, one with the bees themselves, silent, and the other filled only with their sound. How many more rooms I knew there must be if that continued. How much more house it took to keep things separate, to break them down. And in this room, the smell of decomposing onion and beet, potato and rutabaga, all that vegetal rot. And in this room, the last sunflowers of my wife's garden, the first that stretched their petals toward her red moon, instead of the sun that barely again rose over the dirt. And if the light of the moon was mere reflection, and the light of two moons doubly so, why then their different hues against the vast black of the sky? And in this room, a fistful of black seeds. In the next room, the shell of the bear, its proud bones stuck through its skin, its bristled fur fallen like pine needles, its claws pulled from their moorings, its teeth loose in its jaws, its breath rotten as fallen bark, worm-struck as the earth beneath its woods, stinking of meat eaten long past its date, dug up. And in this room, my wife's favorite dress, worn the first time she danced with me. How when I held the fabric to my face, I smelled nothing, because the smell of her sweat was in another room. And in this room, a well-scrubbed floor, and on it a well-scoured pot, scratched by the removal of meals we shared, of meals we ate apart. And in this room, a bowl made of mirrors, so that as I drank of it, it drank of me. And in this room, the song of the stars, never heard after a silence above the dirt, and before that, never this clearly. How I had forgotten even what I had forgotten, this series of notes that made a song, that made a story, all so hard to retell without their sharp light present, hard to hear or hum, even when the stars yet hung from the sky, and impossible now that their shapes had been extinguished. And again, my wife had remembered as I had not, and in this room, lightning, and in this room, thunder, and in this room, how long it had been since it rained. Thank you. Thank you all very much. If people have questions, or take questions, or yeah, take a question or two if people have them, or if you'd like. No pressure. Yes, please.
I noticed in your writing a lot of times bring up concepts of motherhood and pregnancy. In your writing, do you find it difficult to do such things? I mean, being a man.
Right.
Just convey like a mother's bond to her child?
I mean, I guess honestly, I don't think about the gender of characters that way. I don't feel like I'm doing something different necessarily when I'm writing a woman. I will say that I think a lot of my stories are about loss or about fear of loss, and pregnancy and childhood and parenthood and marriage seem like places where those fears are maybe strongest, right? Those bonds are sort of the most fraught. And so so in some ways it's one of the topics to go back to, partly because it's something I'm interested in. I can see the most. But yeah, I know I hear a lot like this sort of like, oh, it's like a different thing to write the opposite gender, and I don't know. I don't know that it is. And I mean, obviously there's differences, but I think I mostly approach it in the same way I would approach writing a male character. But thank you very much. Yeah, please.
From what source do you draw your inspiration to write?
Well, I think there's in the way I see it, there's two things that you can draw from, right? You have your life experience and you have like your art experience, right? And every person, that balance is different. Like maybe a person is very autobiographical, it's like 90% life experience. I would say for me, the balance might tip a little in the art experience. I'm often moved to write by less by things I've done and more by things I've read or watched or listened to, art I've seen. The relationship I have with art in my life produces a lot of the sort of inspiration to write. At least the initial kernel that gets me going. Yeah, please.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've noticed from what you read, a lot of what you write seems to be in like a free form, almost a poetic style. What drove you to write in that style?
I'm really. It's very important to me, like the acoustics of sound or the poetics of sentences. I spend a lot of time on that. I read out loud constantly as I'm writing. It's a part of the process. It's my belief that both the sound and the sense of the story hit the reader. Even if the person never hears it out loud, all those sounds are having a sort of bodily effect. And so trying to use both of them in a certain way, so that not only does the content of the story affect you emotionally, but so does the sound of it. I think that's, for me, really important. I have a hard time reading books that don't have some kind of, I can't feel that acoustic sense to them. Obviously, it's really foregrounded in something like In the House, right? Like it's right on the surface. You can hear it all the time. And that's partly has to do with the sort of the mythic rhythm or the biblical rhythm that's in it, where it has that sort of old school oratory kind of thing, that it has a speech sort of element to it. But always the sound of things is really important to me. I like to feel that in the prose. Please.
This, speaking specifically, I've read some of your stuff and
Yeah.
there seems to be a lot of morality in your stories.
Yeah.
I was wondering how loss, somebody dying or somebody about to die, what that means to you in terms of approaching a story, because lots of characters have either like passed or they're on the brink. So I was wondering what that means to you and why you like to write about that.
What I partly write about violence a lot because I'm sort of obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with its sort of effects. I'm sort of obsessed with it culturally. Obviously, in a moral sense, characters have these moral things they're dealing with. Sometimes putting them in extreme situations is like giving them last chances, right? Like these are choices. You have to make these correct choices because you don't get to do it perpetually, right? I think I like the way that extreme circumstances sometimes brings out who we really are, who we really could be. It puts us in a different role. We talked in the Q&A today a little bit about this, so I won't repeat myself too much. But I'm very interested in violence, but I'm very suspicious of it in art. I'm suspicious of it when it's glamorized. I'm suspicious of it when it's celebrated in some way. And I think it matters to me a lot to interrogate it, but not in a way that somehow makes it enjoyable. And so it's a funny balance to try to fit. And the morality does tend to sort of wrap around that for me. Thank you. Cool. You don't have to belabor it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great night. Thank you.